Hey y'all. Hey y'all. Hello. All right. Welcome to moving inward and onward. I'm so happy that you stopped by. I appreciate it. This week we are moving onward. And this episode being live, we are going to, or I'm going to discuss chapter 7 of my book, Considerations, a guide for moving abroad. And it is entitled Consider Transportation. So I'm going to hit four major points that's discussed in the book. And then I got a treat for you. And that treat is there's a story in there about an incident that took place as it relates to transportation. And I'm going to read that to you in this live uh, episode of Moving Onward. I'm going to read that to you after I go over the 4 points. And if there's anybody still hanging around um, after I finish and you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay. All right. So I'm jumping right in. I'm not wasting any time. Um, Point one, you can bring your US plated car across the border uh, only if you hold a temporal visa, not a permanente. If you are a permanent resident, you cannot bring a US plated car over. You actually have to be uh, either temporal or tourist. Now, if you're temporal, that U.S. plated car can be here as long as your temporal uh, visa is in good standing, and that's 4 years. And if you're a tourist, you can bring your U.S. plated um, a vehicle across the border, and long as it's back over within the 6 months, 180 days. Now, see, I know couples who, as it relates to the visas, where um, like one of them will get a temporary uh, visa, and the other one will get, the husband may will get the permanent, so that they can bring their car over and have their U.S. plated car here for 4 years. But after that 4 years is up, a decision is going to have to be made. So that's point number one. Point two, uh, to drive across um, the border, you're going to need what's called a tip. And a tip is a temporary importation permit. Now, there are uh, several things you need to have when you get ready to cross the border with your car to get the uh, tip, the temporary importation permit. And it is proof of car ownership, proof of American registration, an affidavit from any lien holders authorizing temporary importation, a valid American driver's license, and proof of citizenship. Now, that paperwork don't sound too difficult, right? That's easy to get, but here's the catcher. Make sure that you have the originals plus two copies of all documents. Okay. You're going to need the originals, of course, of everything I just said, and two copies of each one of those documents I mentioned in order to then receive your temporary importation permit. Okay, that's point two. Now, point three, you're going to pay a deposit at the border for that tip, and plus a one-time $30, and it may have went up because this was like 4 years ago when I did my research. One time at that point it was $30, a $30 one-time processing fee, and then your deposit along with that paperwork that I talked about in order to receive your tip. Now, when you return, if you leave, within the allotted time, if you're a tourist, that would be 6 months. And if you are temporal, that will be within the 4 months. You get that deposit back. Um, Now, the date of the car, the date that the car was manufactured, that's going to dictate how much the deposit is going to be. And I guess it all depends on the car, of course. That's tip number 3. And now here we are with tip 4, the fourth and final tip here, information. 4, once time is up, you have 2 choices. You can nationalize your car here, make it a Mexican car. And you know what? That's costly. It's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of uh, mm, restrictions as it relates to, the date of the car, how many miles on the car, possibly even the weight of the car. I know I have it all detailed, within that chapter 7. So the first option that you have once the 4 months is up, the 4 years is up as a temporal, you can nationalize it, because and after 4 years, temporal automatically goes to permanente. Now you don't have to pay for it, but it is an automatic. You can't stay temporal. Um, and then the second choice is take it back across the states and sell it in the US. Drive it back and sell it over there. Those are your 2 choices once time is up. Now, this was just a quick version of chapter 7's information. It's definitely more detailed. Each part of these points I went over is much more detailed uh, in that chapter. But I'm going to move now into the treat that I was talking about, and it is a story that actually happened to me, and I talk about it in the book, and about how it really helped me make my decision. I didn't come here with my car. I started to. That was my first thought, um, that I was going to bring a car and have it hitch a trailer to the back. But again, more research, things changed, and I didn't come with a car. I've been here almost 4 years now, no car, and I'm getting along just fine without it. So here we go with this story. You guys sit back, and this is the second time I'm actually reading this. I read it at a reading a couple years back, and here we go. During the time I was researching and trying to decide if I wanted to drive my car into Mexico, an incident occurred which made the thought of not having a car, paying for insurance, dealing with maintenance, and driving very appealing to me. Okay. It was a warm, sunny day, and I had an appointment across town. As I entered the garage, I noticed my front left tire was low again. I made a mental note that there was a slow leak in that tire, and I was going to have to stop band-aiding it by filling it with air every few days. Pulling out of my driveway, I looked down at the gas gauge and noticed I was on just about a fourth of a tank. I needed to fill up. No problem. I'd stop at the gas station right before hitting the freeway. I pulled up to pump number 1 and proceeded into the gas station, where I asked the cashier for $20 on number 1 and change for $1, explaining to her that I needed to put air in my tire. She obliged, and I walked out, got into my car, and drove over to the air pump. After putting in an adequate amount of air, I knew because I used the gauge. I got back in my car and drove off. While driving down the freeway to my appointment, I looked down at my gas gauge and noticed it was still on a fourth of a tank. Damn. Replaying the whole scene in my mind, I realized that I had never pumped my gas. I must have been so focused on putting air in my tire, I completely blanked out on pumping the gas. Oh well, I was too far down the freeway and closer to my appointment to go back. I reasoned that I had enough gas to get to the appointment and I returned to the gas station afterwards to rectify the situation. I forged ahead. Thankfully, the appointment was an in and out deal, and I was on the freeway heading back to the gas station within an hour. It was still a warm and sunny day as I pulled back into the gas station, and coincidentally, pump number one was open. I pulled up to it, got out, and put the pump inside the tank. I remembered thinking as I should have done it this way in the first place. And maybe that way I wouldn't have forgotten to pump. I walked back into the station where the same cashier was tending another customer. When my turn came, I stepped up and explained how silly I felt. But when I paid for my gas, I drove off and never pumped it. She looked at me indifferently and said that there was nothing she can do about that. Surely she hadn't quite understood what I said. So I explained that it had been less than 2 hours since I was there. Remember? I, I asked, I was the one that asked for change to put air in my tire. I had given her a $20 bill and $1 in exchange for 4 quarters. She then said angrily, "That's not my problem. People can say anything, and you don't have any proof that you didn't pump the gas." Now I was blown away, and my voice is raised as I said to her, "The proof is in my goddamn empty tank." I tried to reason with her, explaining that it had made no sense that I would come back and try to get $20 more worth of gas that my tank couldn't hold in the first place. I wanted the gas I paid for, and you know I paid for it, I said. As we're going back and forth, a gentleman standing behind me raises his voice and says, "Man, you know this lady paid for her gas. Quit tripping and give me $10 on number 7." As he reached over me to drop a $10 bill through the slot. She takes his money and looks at me like, this conversation is over. At this point, I am totally livid and thoroughly outdone. I started looking around the gas station with the thought, oh, you're going to give me $20 worth of something up in here. There were stacks of t-shirts for sale sitting in bins under the large counter. Without thinking any further, I picked up as many of the t-shirts as I could hold, smirked at the cashier, and briskly walked 5 steps to dash out the door. The cashier pushed the button as she stood behind the thick plexiglass protection barrier and locked me in. I turned to her and demanded she open the door. She picked up the phone and said she was calling the police. I walked over and dropped the t-shirts back in the bin and said, "What are you going to do? Tell them I was going to steal?" Defeated, I walked back to the door, rattled it again, demanding that she open the door. She ignored me while holding the phone to her ear. In a split second, I heard the door click as if to open. I spotted a huge incense display sitting on the counter right at the edge of the door. Now, see, I happen to love incense. and I burn it daily. In a snap decision, I snapped up the display with both hands and bolted out the door. The guy who was in line behind me was pumping his gas and immediately summarized what had just happened. He looked at me and said, "Oh, you better hurry up." The adrenaline coursing through my veins in that moment was something I had never experienced. I had never done anything like that in my life. I opened my car door, tossed the display in the passenger seat, and started the car and shot out of the gas station like a bat out of hell. In that instant, I thought I heard a thump of some sort, but with the adrenaline on full blast, I discarded the thought. And as soon as it appeared, as my tires discarded the thought, as soon as it appeared, as my tires burned rubber out onto the street. I was one exit from my home. So I dashed onto the freeway, breathing heavy as if I had run a 100-yard dash. A car pulled up alongside of me on the freeway. And when I looked over, he was motioning towards the back of my car. And I instantly thought, oh, the gas cap must have been open. It wouldn't be the first time somebody motioned and mouthed to me that fact. I mouthed to him the words gas cap, shaking my head in affirmation. He shook his head no vigorously. I looked through my side rear mirror back at the tank and discovered I was dragging the entire gas pump down the freeway. That thump I heard was the pump being snatched out of station. I flashed back to putting the pump in my tank before I had walked in the station to claim my $20 worth of gas, assuming that there wouldn't be a problem. So boy, was I wrong. I watched in horror as sparks were popping up the pump being dragged by my car down the freeway. I came up my exit, pulled over quickly, pulled the pump out from my tank and threw it in the grass on the off ramp. I shook my head, got back in my car, and drove home. I backed into the garage, let the door down, took a few deep breaths in the incense display I snatched off the shelf and invaded my nostrils. I looked down at the gas gauge, which was just about on empty now, cut the car off, picked up my display of incense, and went in the house. Throughout the rest of that warm, sunny day, I retold the story to family and friends who thought that was one of the funniest stories they had ever heard. There was teasing, laughing, and the asking of boxes of incense with little concern of police involvement. I never returned to that gas station during the rest of my stay before I moved to Mexico. I'm currently 2 months away from my 1 year anniversary here as I write this. I am burning the incense that was my retribution for not receiving the $20 worth of gas on that warm and sunny day. All right. So, um, glad you guys stuck around and shared that story with me. It's part of chapter 7, which is again, consider transportation. I appreciate you guys stopping by. And as always, one light, one love. I'll see you next week.